The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 16-year-old Sophia Garcia stood at the Family Feud podium with her left hand resting confidently on the buzzer, while her right sleeve hung empty beside her, pinned neatly back in the way that had become second nature over 16 years of living with a limb difference that most people could see, but few truly understood. When Steve Harvey asked about pain that nobody can see, Sophia's response, delivered with the quiet strength of someone who had learned that the most profound suffering often happens in spaces that don't exist, would reveal the mysterious reality of phantom limb syndrome and what it means to experience constant pain in a part of your body that was never there. "The pain in my right arm," Sophia had said, her words carrying 16 years of experiencing sensations in a limb that had never existed, of trying to explain to doctors and family members how she could feel burning, cramping, and shooting pains in an arm that was absent from birth. "I was born without my right arm, but I feel pain there every day like it's being crushed or burned. People think I'm making it up because how can something that was never there hurt?" The studio had fallen into a puzzled silence as everyone present tried to understand how the human nervous system could create the experience of pain in a limb that had never developed, and how someone could spend their entire life dealing with physical suffering that was both completely real and completely invisible to everyone around them. Sophia Garcia had been born with a condition called congenital limb deficiency, specifically the absence of her right arm from just below the shoulder. Unlike people who lose limbs through trauma or illness and then experience phantom limb pain, Sophia had been experiencing phantom sensations in her missing arm since early childhood, despite the fact that the limb had never existed for her brain to remember. Phantom limb syndrome in people with congenital limb differences is a complex neurological phenomenon that scientists are still working to understand fully. While it was once believed that people born without limbs couldn't experience phantom sensations because there were no memories of the missing limb for the brain to recreate, research has shown that the brain's body map includes representations of limbs even when those limbs never developed physically. For Sophia, the phantom pain had been a constant presence throughout her childhood and adolescence, manifesting as burning sensations, crushing feelings, cramping, and sharp shooting pains that felt like they were coming from fingers, wrist, and forearm that weren't there. The pain varied in intensity and quality, sometimes feeling like her missing hand was being squeezed in a vise, other times like her phantom fingers were being bent backward or subjected to extreme heat or cold. The most frustrating aspect of Sophia's phantom pain was its invisibility and the skepticism it often encountered from people who couldn't understand how she could feel sensations in a limb that had never existed. Even some medical professionals had initially dismissed her reports of phantom pain, assuming that since she had been born without the limb, she couldn't possibly be experiencing the neurological phenomena that typically affected people who had lost limbs after birth. This medical skepticism had delayed appropriate treatment for Sophia's phantom pain and had contributed to feelings of isolation and self-doubt about her own experiences. As a child, she had sometimes wondered if the pain was imaginary, if she was somehow making it up or exaggerating normal sensations. The lack of validation from adults who were supposed to help her had been confusing and demoralizing during years when she was also learning to navigate the world with a visible physical difference. The phantom pain had affected almost every aspect of Sophia's daily life in ways that were difficult for others to understand or accommodate. The pain was unpredictable, sometimes striking suddenly during important activities like tests, social events, or family gatherings. When phantom pain episodes were severe, Sophia had difficulty concentrating, sleeping, or participating fully in activities that required her attention and energy. School had been particularly challenging because teachers and administrators often struggled to understand how Sophia could be experiencing debilitating pain that didn't correspond to any visible injury or medical emergency they could address. She had missed classes due to phantom pain episodes, had difficulty completing assignments when the pain was severe, and had sometimes been accused of using her condition as an excuse for academic problems that were actually related to her ongoing suffering. The social impact of phantom limb pain had been complex and isolating. While Sophia's visible limb difference had presented its own challenges in terms of accessibility and social acceptance, the phantom pain had added an invisible layer of difficulty that even well-meaning friends and family members found hard to comprehend. People could see that she was missing an arm and could make accommodations for that reality, but they couldn't see or understand pain that seemed to come from nowhere. Sophia had developed various coping strategies for managing her phantom pain, including medication, physical therapy techniques, and mindfulness practices designed to help her brain process the confusing signals it was receiving. Some treatments had provided temporary relief, but others had been ineffective or had created side effects that were sometimes worse than the phantom pain itself. The psychological impact of living with chronic phantom pain had been significant and ongoing. Sophia had experienced depression and anxiety related to the unpredictability of her symptoms, the lack of understanding from others, and the frustration of dealing with pain that couldn't be easily explained or treated. She had sometimes felt like she was living in two different realities, the visible reality where she was a capable young woman with one arm, and the invisible reality where she was constantly fighting against pain that existed only in her nervous system. Sophia's family had struggled to understand and support her phantom pain experiences. Her parents, Maria and Carlos Garcia, had been excellent advocates for addressing the practical challenges of her limb difference, ensuring she had access to appropriate prosthetics, occupational therapy, and adaptive technologies. But the phantom pain had been more difficult for them to understand and address, because it wasn't something they could see or fix through external accommodations. The family had worked with various medical specialists to find effective treatments for Sophia's phantom pain, but progress had been slow and sometimes frustrating. Phantom limb pain is notoriously difficult to treat because it originates in the nervous system rather than in damaged tissue that can be repaired or medicated in straightforward ways. The treatments that helped some people were ineffective for others, and finding the right combination of approaches often required extensive trial and error. Sophia had also dealt with the additional complexity of prosthetic devices and their relationship to her phantom pain. While prosthetics could provide functional benefits for certain activities, they sometimes triggered or intensified phantom pain episodes, creating a difficult choice between functional capability and pain management. She had tried various types of prosthetic devices over the years, but had ultimately chosen to function primarily without them, because the phantom pain they triggered was more limiting than the functional challenges of having one arm. The decision to live without prosthetics had been empowering for Sophia in many ways, as it had allowed her to develop confidence in her natural abilities and to avoid the phantom pain complications that prosthetics created. But it had also required her to advocate constantly for understanding that not all people with limb differences want or need prosthetic devices, and that choosing to live without them was a valid personal choice rather than a sign of giving up or lack of motivation. Sophia's experience with phantom pain had also given her unique insights into the nature of pain, disability, and the relationship between physical and psychological experiences. She had learned that pain didn't have to be visible to be real, that the brain's interpretation of sensory information was more complex than most people understood, and that invisible disabilities could be just as limiting and challenging as visible ones. The Family Feud application had been submitted by Carlos Garcia, who had hoped that participating in a positive family activity might provide Sophia with an opportunity to be celebrated for her strength and resilience, rather than being defined primarily by her physical difference or her medical challenges. He had thought that appearing on television might help raise awareness about limb differences and phantom pain while allowing Sophia to experience the joy of normal family fun. During the pre-show preparations, Sophia had been excited and engaged, grateful for an opportunity to participate in an activity where her limb difference was irrelevant to her ability to contribute to her family's success. But she had also been managing phantom pain throughout the experience, using breathing techniques and mental strategies she had developed to cope with pain episodes while maintaining her participation in important activities. The game had been proceeding with Sophia participating enthusiastically and demonstrating the quick thinking and competitive spirit that had made her successful in school and other activities despite her challenges. The Garcia family was competing against the Johnson family from Oklahoma, and both sides had been playing with good energy and mutual respect. But when it came time for the category pain that nobody can see, and it was Sophia's turn at the buzzer, the question had struck directly at the heart of her daily experience and the invisible suffering that accompanied her visible difference. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Sophia's confidence, despite her obvious physical difference and the maturity in her expression, had made him more attentive and respectful than usual. "All right, Sophia," Steve had said gently, "pain that nobody can see. What comes to mind?" Sophia had looked at Steve with the kind of directness that comes from someone who has learned to speak honestly about difficult realities, then responded with the matter-of-fact explanation that she had perfected over years of trying to help others understand her experience. "The pain in my right arm," Sophia had said, her words immediately creating visible confusion among audience members who could clearly see that she didn't have a right arm. "I was born without my right arm, but I feel pain there every day like it's being crushed or burned. People think I'm making it up because how can something that was never there hurt?" The studio had become very quiet as everyone present tried to process the counterintuitive reality that someone could experience real debilitating pain in a part of their body that didn't exist. Steve had paused, clearly intrigued by this apparent paradox and wanting to understand more. "Sophia," Steve had said with obvious curiosity and respect, "help me understand this. How can you feel pain in an arm that isn't there?" "It's called phantom limb pain," Sophia had explained, clearly comfortable with educating others about her condition. "My brain has a map of what my body should look like, including my right arm. Even though the arm never developed, my nervous system still sends pain signals as if it's there." The studio audience had listened with obvious fascination as they learned about a medical phenomenon that challenged their understanding of how pain and body awareness work. "What does that pain feel like?" Steve had asked with genuine interest. "Sometimes it feels like my hand is being crushed in a vice," Sophia had said. "Other times it feels like my fingers are being bent backward, or like my arm is on fire. It can last for minutes or hours, and there's nothing I can do to make it stop because I can't treat an arm that isn't there." Steve had looked at Maria and Carlos Garcia, who were clearly proud of their daughter's courage and articulate explanation of her condition. "Mr. and Mrs. Garcia," Steve had said, "how has this affected your family's understanding of pain and disability?" "It's taught us that there's so much about the human body and brain that we don't understand," Maria had said. "Sophia has shown incredible strength dealing with pain that most people can't even imagine." Carlos had nodded, his voice filled with admiration. "She's never used her phantom pain as an excuse," Carlos had said. "She's found ways to manage it while still achieving everything she wants to achieve. She's an honor student, plays adaptive sports, and volunteers at the hospital where other kids with limb differences go for treatment." Steve had looked at Sophia with obvious respect and admiration. "Sophia," Steve had said, "what you're dealing with challenges everything most people think they know about pain and disability. You're living proof that strength comes in many forms, and that the most difficult battles are often the ones nobody else can see." Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, understanding that this moment required recognition of both Sophia's visible strength and her invisible struggle. "Sophia," Steve had said, placing the jacket around her shoulders where it draped over her left arm and her empty right sleeve, "this jacket represents something very important today. It represents the understanding that your pain is real, even though the limb isn't there, that invisible disabilities are just as challenging as visible ones, and that you have the courage to live fully, despite challenges that most people couldn't imagine." Sophia had adjusted the jacket with her left hand, clearly moved by the recognition and validation of her experience. Steve had turned to address the studio audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve had announced, "Sophia Garcia is teaching us something profound about the complexity of human experience. She's showing us that pain doesn't have to be visible to be real, that the brain and body have mysteries we're still learning to understand, and that strength means continuing to pursue your dreams despite invisible challenges." The game had resumed with increased awareness and respect for the complexity of disability and pain, as everyone present had learned something new about the ways that human experience can transcend simple categories of visible and invisible, present and absent. When Steve had asked the final question about things that make you proud, Sophia had answered, "Learning that my pain is real, even when others can't see it, and helping other people understand that invisible doesn't mean imaginary." The episode aired 3 months later and became an important educational tool for phantom limb awareness and understanding of complex pain conditions. Medical organizations and disability advocacy groups used Sophia's story to help people understand that pain is a neurological experience that doesn't always correspond to visible tissue damage. Sophia had kept Steve's jacket as a symbol of the moment when her invisible pain was publicly acknowledged and validated. More importantly, her story had helped her connect with other people experiencing phantom pain and had contributed to research efforts aimed at better understanding and treating phantom limb syndrome. The jacket represented her understanding that invisible experiences are still real experiences, that pain doesn't need to be visible to be valid, and that her strength lay not in denying her phantom pain, but in living fully despite it. Because that's what courage looks like when it faces pain that exists in spaces that don't exist. That's what strength sounds like, when it validates invisible experiences in a world that often demands visible proof. And that's what happens when a 16-year-old young woman teaches everyone around her that the most profound truths about human experience often exist in the spaces between what we can see and what we can understand. Sophia Garcia had been living with phantom pain in a limb that was never there, but on that day at Family Feud, she showed the world that invisible doesn't mean imaginary, that pain is real regardless of its source, and that the human spirit can thrive even when dealing with challenges that seem impossible to explain or understand.